When I think about how everything started, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things began to fall apart, maybe because nothing ever really exploded. It was more like the slow, quiet erosion of something I thought was solid, the way a shoreline disappears after years of soft waves. My name's Elise, I'm 32, and this is the story of how I lost my marriage in the middle of a city that never stopped moving, and how, for a while, I stopped moving with it. I met Daniel when I was 22. He was older, 30, confident in a way that felt grounding back then. We met in a coffee shop near my university, and I remember how he listened when I talked, like my words were music instead of noise. He had that kind of stillness that makes you feel safe, the kind of presence that swallows chaos. He worked in finance, wore cufflinks, and spoke softly. I was a mess of ink-stained notebooks, chipped nail polish, and late rent payments. Somehow we made sense. The first years were easy, or maybe they just looked that way from the outside. We had an apartment overlooking the river, matching coffee mugs, and a Sunday routine that felt like home. But love can curdle quietly, and I didn't notice when his laughter started sounding like politeness. We stopped touching each other like it meant something. We still went through the motions, morning kisses, dinner together, texts during the day, but there was a distance between us, like two people living parallel lives under one roof. I used to tell myself this was normal, that every long-term relationship faded like this. That real love was the quiet, steady kind, not the pulse-racing, breathless thing you read about. But then came her. Her name was Lee. I didn't know about her right away, of course. It started with Daniel getting home later. He'd say work was crazy, and I'd nod. I wanted to believe him because not believing him meant tearing open something I wasn't ready to face. The first real sign was small perfume. Not mine. Sharp, floral, lingering on his collar after he'd hugged me goodnight. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself I was paranoid. I'd seen enough. My husband is cheating, posts online to know how messy suspicion can make you. But you can't unknow something once your gut tells you it's real. A few weeks later, it wasn't perfume. It was silence. He started taking calls on the balcony, whispering. Once, I caught my name between his words, followed by a long pause. The kind that makes your skin crawl. The night I found out, I wasn't even looking for proof. I was cleaning. I opened his laptop to queue up a playlist while I folded laundry, and the messages were right there. They weren't labeled Lee or anything suspicious. Just L, but the thread was full of her. The way he told her she made him feel alive again. The way she joked about me, does she still make that terrible coffee? And the way he laughed back, typing, she doesn't even notice me anymore. I don't remember how long I sat there staring at the screen. My body felt cold, like my blood had stopped moving. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared until the words blurred, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for too long. When Daniel came home that night, I asked him straight out, "Who's Lee?" He froze, just stood there in the doorway holding his jacket, his mouth slightly open. For a second, I think he was calculating how much I knew. Then his shoulders dropped. "She's someone from work," he said, his voice quiet. I laughed not because it was funny, but because it felt insane. "Someone from work? You told her I don't notice you. You told her you feel alive with her. That's not someone from work, Daniel." He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to lie. He just sat down on the couch and said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I asked, "Do you love her?" He hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. That night, I packed a bag and stayed with my friend Mia. I remember standing in her kitchen at 2 a.m., holding a mug of tea I didn't drink, while she told me all the things people say. "He doesn't deserve you. You'll get through this. He'll regret it." I wanted to believe her, but all I could think was that I'd built a whole life around someone who looked at another woman the way I used to look at him. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, silence, and pretending. I went to work, smiled when people asked if I was okay, and cried in public bathrooms between meetings. Daniel sent me emails, long, rambling ones, about how he'd made a mistake, how he'd end it with her, how he wanted to fix things. But something in me had cracked. You can tape glass back together, but it's never clear again. And yet, when he showed up at my door one night, soaked from the rain, crying, I let him in. I told myself I just wanted closure, but really I wanted to see if there was still something worth saving. We talked for hours. He swore it was over. He begged me to come home. I almost said yes. I almost let him pull me back into the life we'd built, the comfort of routine. But when he reached for my hand, I felt nothing. Just a quiet, empty space where love used to live. I realized then that infidelity doesn't just destroy trust. It kills the illusion that love is unbreakable. Months later, I met someone new. His name was Sam. He was kind in a quiet way, nothing like Daniel. He listened when I spoke, didn't try to fix me. We went slow. But every time he touched me, I'd flinch like my body still remembered betrayal. Healing isn't linear, it's a spiral. You revisit the pain, but each time it hurts a little less. It's been 3 years now. I'm not with Sam anymore. We ended things when I realized I was still learning to love myself before I could love anyone else. Daniel remarried last year. I saw a photo of him and Lee, yes, her, on social media. They looked happy. I didn't feel anger, just a strange, quiet acceptance. Sometimes, at night, I lie in bed and think about how love changes shape. How something that once felt eternal can end, and it doesn't mean it wasn't real. It just means it was temporary, like everything else. If you've ever been betrayed, you know that heartbreak doesn't make you bitter. It makes you human. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. After Daniel remarried, I didn't cry. I didn't even really feel sad, at least, not in the sharp, unbearable way I once did. It was more like a soft ache, a tenderness that had dulled with time but never quite disappeared. People talk about closure like it's a door you shut, but it's not. It's a window you learn to look through differently. I moved to a new apartment after the divorce. A small place, 1 bedroom, high ceilings, and light that spilled in through the east-facing windows every morning. It was mine, just mine, and for a while that felt like an accomplishment. I filled it with plants, soft blankets, and the smell of coffee that didn't remind me of anyone else. I started writing again, not about love, not yet, but about the smaller things I'd ignored for years. The color of dawn on wet pavement, the hum of the city when it sleeps, the way silence feels when you're not afraid of it anymore. I thought I was done with the story. I thought heartbreak was something you could pack away neatly after enough time had passed. But then he came back, not Daniel, not even Sam. Someone I didn't expect. His name was Aaron. We met at a friend's dinner party, the kind where everyone's a little too tipsy and talking too loudly about things they only half care about. He sat across from me, quiet, observant, smiling when I rolled my eyes at the noise. After dessert, he offered to walk me home, said it was on his way. It was. He was older than me by a few years, with the kind of calm that only comes from having survived something. We talked for hours that night, about books, family, the city, how people never really change but sometimes surprise you anyway. When we reached my building, he said, "You seem like someone who feels too much." I laughed maybe too quickly. Is that a bad thing? He shook his head. No, just rare. It wasn't supposed to become anything. I was careful, cautious, the way people are when they've been burned before. But Aaron had this way of making me feel seen without asking for anything in return. We started meeting for coffee, then walks, then long talks that spilled into early morning. He never pushed. He just stayed. When he kissed me for the first time, I froze. Not because I didn't want it, I did, but because I realized how much I'd missed being wanted in a way that wasn't about guilt or apology. His hands were steady. Mine weren't. For a few months, it felt simple. We were 2 people trying to be careful with each other. He knew about Daniel. He never pried. I liked that about him, the respect of unspoken things. But love, I've learned, doesn't always wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it arrives like a slow leak, filling the cracks before you realize you're already full again. And that scared me. Because when something feels too good, part of you starts searching for the flaw. I found it one night when I couldn't sleep and scrolled through social media, a habit I thought I'd outgrown. His name popped up in a tagged photo from a weekend trip. Him, smiling, an arm around a woman I didn't know. Her caption read, "Finally got him away for a weekend." My stomach dropped. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen like touching it would make it less real. When I asked him about it the next day, he didn't lie. He looked at me with something that wasn't quite guilt, more like resignation. It's complicated, he said softly. Are you with her? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation again, the same kind that had ended my marriage. It's not what you think, he said, and I almost laughed, because it's always what you think. He told me they'd been together for years, that they were on a break, that he didn't plan for this, the same script, the same lines, like infidelity is just a story people inherit. I remember sitting on my couch, watching him pace, and thinking how strange it was that heartbreak feels so familiar once you've lived through it. The disbelief, the numbness, the strange, detached calm that comes before the storm. When he finally said, "I don't want to lose you," I felt tired more than anything else. Tired of being the woman who loves too deeply, too forgivingly. Tired of believing people when they said they didn't mean for it to happen. I told him to leave. He did. After the door closed, I sat there for a long time, listening to the city outside, cars, laughter, someone playing guitar a few floors down. I thought about Daniel, about Lee, about all the ways we hurt each other without intending to. And I wondered if love always carried a little bit of destruction with it. Days passed, then weeks. He texted a few times, apologies, explanations, long messages about how he'd ended it with her and wanted to make things right. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that caring wasn't the same as staying. There's a point in every woman's story, I think, where she stops trying to be the lesson and starts becoming the narrator. Where she stops saying, "Why did this happen to me?" and starts asking, "What am I supposed to do with it?" For me, that moment came one evening when I was walking home after work. The sun was setting, the city glowing gold and tired. I stopped by the bridge, the one Daniel and I used to cross on Sunday mornings, and leaned against the railing. The wind was warm. Below, the water shimmered, indifferent. I thought about all the versions of myself that had loved and lost, the girl who believed in forever, the wife who begged for honesty, the woman who thought she could outgrow heartbreak. I realized they were all still with me, just softer now, quieter. I don't know if I'll fall in love again. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. What I do know is that love isn't something you find, it's something you learn how to hold without breaking it, including the kind you owe yourself. That night, I deleted Aaron's number, not out of anger but gratitude, because every ending, even the painful ones, has a way of setting you free. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to come home. I already was. After I deleted Aaron's number, I thought there'd be some kind of cinematic relief, like the universe would pat me on the back and say, "Good job, you finally learned the lesson." But real healing isn't cinematic. It's slow, uneven, and sometimes you wake up missing people you know you shouldn't. Some mornings, I'd reach for my phone out of habit, thumb hovering over his name that wasn't there anymore. And even though I was the one who ended it, there were days it still felt like I'd been left. There's something about love ending, no matter how it ends, that makes you feel like a failure at something you can't even define. I started going to therapy after that. Not the kind of therapy where you lie down and talk about your childhood, but the kind where you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say the things you've been avoiding for years. My therapist, Nora, was gentle but firm. She didn't let me hide behind bitterness. One session, after I'd spent half an hour talking about Daniel and Aaron and all the ways I'd been betrayed, she said quietly, "You keep describing these men as if they're the entire story. What happens when you start describing yourself instead?" I didn't have an answer, so I started trying to find one. I began doing small things that felt like tiny rebellions. I stopped wearing the perfume Daniel used to compliment. I dyed my hair darker. I took myself out to dinner and sat alone, resisting the urge to look at my phone. I made lists, not of things to do, but of things I'd forgotten I liked. Thunderstorms, messy bookstores, the smell of paint. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started to feel like a person again. One evening, a few months later, I was walking home from work when it started raining. Not a soft drizzle, but one of those sudden, unapologetic downpours that soak you before you can even think about running for cover. I ducked under an awning, laughing despite myself. The man next to me glanced over and smiled, not in a flirtatious way, but like we were sharing the same small moment of surrender. And I realized then that life goes on, even when you're not trying to catch it. I didn't talk to Daniel again after the divorce papers were finalized, but sometimes I'd pass by places that used to belong to us. The park where we used to sit on Sundays, the cafe where he first told me he loved me, and I'd feel this strange warmth instead of pain. Maybe that's forgiveness. Not the kind where you absolve someone, but the kind where you stop wishing the past had been different. One night, I found an old box while cleaning out my closet, letters, photos, little fragments of a life that no longer fit me. At the bottom was a note I'd written to myself years ago after Daniel first confessed. It said, "One day this won't hurt anymore." I remember writing it with shaking hands, not really believing it. But now, reading it, I smiled. It wasn't that it stopped hurting. It's that I learned to live with the space it left behind. Aaron reached out once, months later. Just a short message. "I still think about you." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't still think about him too, but because I finally understood that thinking about someone isn't the same as needing them. Sometimes love teaches you how to stay. Sometimes it teaches you how to leave. I spent my 30th birthday alone by choice. I took a day off work, turned off my phone, and went to the coast. It wasn't planned. I just woke up and drove until the city disappeared behind me. The beach was almost empty, the sky the color of steel, the kind of weather that feels honest. I stood there with my shoes off, waves brushing over my feet, and thought about all the versions of me that had loved and lost and tried again. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for any of them. They'd all done their best with what they knew. Grief, I think, is just love with nowhere to go. And maybe healing is learning that you can keep it without needing to give it back to anyone. When I drove home that evening, I passed a wedding by the water. People laughing, dancing, the kind of joy that feels endless when you're inside it. I didn't feel envy, not even sadness, just this quiet hope that maybe, somewhere down the line, I'd get to feel that again, differently, more honestly. But even if I didn't, I'd still be okay. Because this time, I wasn't waiting for someone to choose me. I already had. Now, when people ask if I believe in love, I tell them yes, but not the kind they think. I believe in the love that makes you look at yourself and say, "I deserve better." The love that leaves and comes back as strength. The love that hurts but doesn't harden you. Sometimes I write about it, not in journals anymore, but in small essays that no one reads except me. The kind that start with, "I once thought love was everything," and end with, "I think love is just being brave enough to begin again." The truth is, I still think about Daniel sometimes, and Aaron, and the versions of myself that lived with them, but they don't haunt me anymore. They're just names in a story I outgrew. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been where I was, I want you to know that one day you'll wake up, and the first thing you'll feel isn't loss. It'll be peace. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady kind of peace that fills the spaces love once lived in. That's the kind of ending no one warns you about. The kind that isn't about getting someone back, but about coming back to yourself. And when it finally happens, you'll realize that was the love story all along. Sometimes I wonder if we ever really move on, or if we just learn how to carry the ghosts better. I used to think healing meant forgetting, scrubbing every trace of a person out of my life until I could look at their name without flinching. But that's not what happened. What happened was quieter. I started remembering without pain. I could replay the good parts, even laugh at the ridiculous ones, and it felt like looking at an old photograph of myself. Distant but familiar, like seeing someone you once knew deeply, but now only recognize in passing. There's a strange tenderness in realizing that the people who broke you also shaped you. That the woman who sat in her car crying at stoplights and replaying arguments in her head is the same woman who now wakes up and makes coffee without thinking about anyone else's schedule. I used to believe my story was about loss, losing a husband, losing a lover, losing who I thought I was. But maybe it was about reclamation. About learning that I was never really lost, just buried under all the versions of myself I built for other people. After the divorce, my friends tried to set me up with new people. They meant well, but I wasn't ready. I went on one date, just one, with a man named Marcus. He was kind, funny in a dry way, and he didn't flinch when I mentioned that I'd been married before. But halfway through the dinner, as he was talking about his sister's wedding, I realized I was listening like someone watching a movie they've already seen. detached, polite, but not present. And it hit me that I didn't want to start over yet. I wanted to know what it felt like to just be me without orbiting around anyone else's gravity. So I thanked him, smiled, and went home. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the floor of my apartment, and felt something that wasn't loneliness. It was solitude, and it was beautiful in its own quiet way. I stopped checking social media as much. I deleted photos, not out of anger, but out of space-making. My apartment became lighter, emptier in a way that didn't hurt. I filled it with things that were mine alone. Art I actually liked, books I never had time to read, a plant that somehow stayed alive despite me forgetting to water it. Somewhere along the way, I started painting again. Nothing fancy, just cheap acrylics and old canvases from a thrift store. It began as something to do with my hands on bad days, but then I noticed how the colors started to reflect my moods, soft, muted blues at first, then bolder, more chaotic bursts of red and orange. One day, I stepped back from a finished piece and thought, this is what healing looks like. Messy, layered, full of places where I'd painted over mistakes, but let the texture remain. Months turned into a year. Daniel remarried, I heard, through a mutual friend. The news didn't sting the way I thought it would. In fact, it made sense. He'd always needed someone to fill the spaces between his silences. I just wasn't that person anymore. Aaron moved away, too. A new job in another state. Every once in a while, he'd like one of my posts, a quiet digital echo, but I never reached out. I think we both knew what it meant. We'd loved each other in a moment that wasn't built to last. I used to replay our last conversation in my head, the one where I told him goodbye. I can still hear the catch in his voice, the way he said my name like it was a confession. For a long time, I thought closure would come from him saying the right thing. But closure, I've learned, is something you build yourself. It's waking up one morning and realizing you haven't thought about them in days. It's laughing without guilt. It's no longer trying to rewrite the story to make it make sense. One afternoon, I ran into Daniel's mother at a grocery store. It caught me off guard. I hadn't seen her since before everything fell apart. For a moment, I considered pretending not to notice, but she spotted me first. She smiled, that same kind smile she always had, and said, "You look good, Elise, happier." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thank you." And she nodded, almost knowingly, before walking away. It was such a small interaction, but when I got home, I cried. Not because I missed Daniel, but because for the first time, someone from that part of my life saw me not as the woman who was left, but as someone who survived. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop looking backward. I started writing again, essays, little stories, things I'd never publish but needed to put somewhere. One night I wrote, "Maybe we're all just looking for the person we can be quiet next to." It felt true. Love doesn't have to be grand gestures or chaos. It can be soft, consistent, the kind that doesn't demand you shrink yourself. Sometimes I walk past couples on the street and smile. Not wistfully, just genuinely. I don't envy them anymore. I know love will come again, maybe when I least expect it, maybe in a completely different form. But I don't crave it like I used to. The ache has softened into something gentle, something like acceptance. Last month I got an email from Aaron. Just one line, "I hope you're doing well." No apology, no nostalgia, just simple human decency. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. It wasn't anger, I just didn't need to reply. There was a time when I would have written back instantly, pouring out paragraphs of meaning. Now, silence felt like the kindest answer. The next day, I woke up early and drove to the lake outside the city. It was the same Lake Daniel, and I used to visit on weekends, back when things still felt possible. The air was cold, the water still. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and listened to the sound of birds and distant traffic and my own steady breathing. It hit me then, this was what peace feels like. Not an absence of pain, but the presence of balance. I used to think my story ended when they left, but it didn't. It began when I stayed. I stayed with myself through the nights that felt unbearable, through the mornings that started with doubt and ended with tiny victories, like not checking my phone, or smiling at a stranger, or simply getting out of bed. I stayed through grief, through guilt, through that aching desire to fix what was never mine to fix. And somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need anyone to complete me. I just needed to stop leaving myself behind. Maybe love isn't about finding the person who makes you whole. Maybe it's about learning to be whole on your own, so when love finds you again, it's not filling a void, it's sharing a space that's already full. So if you ask me now what I've learned, I'll tell you this. Love doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. It pulls you apart so you can see what you're made of. And if you're lucky, you build something stronger in its place, not walls, but boundaries. Not fear, but wisdom. Sometimes, late at night, I still scroll through old messages, not to dwell, but to remind myself how far I've come. The words don't sting anymore. They're just echoes, proof that I lived through something real. And maybe that's all any of us are trying to do, live through it, learn from it, and come out softer, not harder. I don't know what comes next. Maybe another love, maybe just more of this quiet, steady contentment. But whatever it is, I know I'll face it without losing myself again. Because I finally understand that the greatest love story I'll ever have is the one where I learned to stay when everyone else left.